The Handkerchief by Great 78. Chapter 62. Memories and Mead. March had arrived, and with it more failure with the sodding vanishing cabinet. In desperation he turned to one of the only people he knew who might have been around when the cabinet was still working. Entering the boys' toilet near the library, he locked and warded the door, then turned to the room at large. Myrtle. There was a splash in one of the stalls. Then the young girl drifted through the door of the stall, apparently happy to see him. It had been some time since they had talked, and Draco had a feeling that Myrtle didn't have many friends. "You're back!" she exclaimed. "I just wanted to ask you some questions about your time here at Hogwarts, both before you died and after." She beamed at him and agreed. "Do you ever recall seeing a large black cabinet somewhere in the castle? It has a bunch of ancient runes carved on it. It probably didn't have much kept inside of it." "Yes, I remember one like that. It used to sit on the main floor, just below here, off of the entrance hall." "Do you know anything about it?" "One of the portraits told me that it had come from the headmaster's office, but I think when Professor Dippet took over the school, he had it moved out of there." Draco recognized the name Dippet as the headmaster before Dumbledore. "Yes. What else?" "I remember seeing lots of students hiding in it a few years after I died. They would go in and not come out for hours." "Who were they?" Draco asked curiously. This would have been in the middle of the 1940s, the middle of the global Wizarding War, when many were fearful of Grindelwald. "Mostly Slytherins. A lot of them were friends with that Tom boy," Myrtle said, scrunching up her nose. "Tom?" "Yes, he was a prefect, 2 years ahead of me, the year that I died. He was very handsome, but not always very nice. He teased me sometimes, even when I was alive, calling me a mudblood once in my first year. After I died, they awarded him a trophy for services to the school. He discovered whatever it was that had killed me, that basilisk thing, I suppose. A little too late to save me, of course, but I suppose he at least did that." "He closed the Chamber of Secrets? He got rid of the basilisk? How?" Draco was thoroughly confused. Who was this boy? "I don't know, silly. I was a little busy, trying to figure out how to be a ghost and everything." Myrtle sniffled and gave a small wail. Draco patiently waited for her to calm down, offering a polite nod and sympathetic tilt of his head. Finally, he was able to speak again. "Right. Well, so the cabinet was used by some Slytherins to hide. Anything else?" "It was mostly empty for several years. Og used it for some gameskeeper items, buckets and spades and such, but when Hagrid took over he moved everything out. Do you know Hagrid? He was in my year. You know, even though he was taller than even the professors. He was such a sweetheart." Myrtle wiped a fresh tear and smiled. "Yes, I know Hagrid. Such a sweetheart," he echoed, and Myrtle frowned at him as though he were taking the mickey out of her. "So what else?" "Well, Filch used to keep cleaning supplies in it, but they kept disappearing, so he stopped using it, and it mostly just stayed empty. Then Peeves decided to drop it one night, a few years ago, on a dare from Nearly Headless Nick. Filch was furious." Myrtle's eyes shone with glee at the memory. Now maybe they were getting somewhere. "And then what?" Draco asked. "Filch tried to repair it, but you know he's a squib. So the spell wasn't strong, and it didn't stay fixed for very long. And Filch didn't want to ask anyone for help. He was too embarrassed. Any time someone touched it, the cabinet would break apart again. When those Weasley twins put that boy in there, they had quite a time keeping the doors closed and attached to the cabinet. It was very funny." Yes, Draco was sure. It was funny to the Weasleys, but probably not so much for Montague. Do you know what happened to the boy? The one who was stuck inside? No, but something seemed different about it. I only ever saw those boys years ago going inside a couple of times, and nothing seemed to happen. But when this boy went inside, there was a strange rattling and sparks. And funny enough, a week or so later, it seemed as though I saw that boy in the pipes. Draco scrunched up his nose in disgust. You mean when he splinched himself in that toilet? No, this was before that. And I was so sorry that I missed it, the splinching, I mean. That was the most exciting thing to happen in a loo since Hermione's tale. You saw him before he splinched himself? Draco was trying not to picture this tale. Yes, he was in one of the large pipes, screaming, and he reached out like he wanted to touch me, but then he disappeared. Myrtle seemed almost confused at her own explanation. So he was a ghost? No, he was solid. The water went around him in the pipes, and he didn't walk through the pipes. It's like he just blinked away. Draco shivered involuntarily. That had likely been one of Montague's attempts at apparition. Whatever had happened inside that cabinet must have been horrific. So, then what happened? He asked. To the cabinet, I mean. Well, after the fireworks display, it was in a horrible state. Filch could no longer repair it, so Professor Flitwick made it vanish. So the Room of Hidden Things was made up of vanished objects. Draco had wondered about this, and that's how the vanishing cabinet ended up where it did. Why are you asking me all of this? Myrtle asked him shrewdly. The vanishing cabinet. It makes a portal like a passageway. It ends in a shop in Diagon. I'm trying to repair it because it seems that when Peeves dropped it, something about the magic got messed up. Why do you want to fix it? I've been ordered by a very dark wizard to kill someone. I told you that before. The problem is, the person to be killed is Dumbledore, and I can't do it. He's too powerful, and I don't want to. So, it's difficult, see? Myrtle, for once, was struck silent for a bit. Then she said, You're right. I don't think you can kill Dumbledore. I thought you said I could do whatever I set my mind to, Draco said wryly. That was before I knew it was killing Dumbledore. You don't have a chance, Myrtle said matter-of-factly. Thanks, I guess, Draco replied. Just because he was inclined to agree with her didn't make it less of a sting. So what does the cabinet have to do with anything? She asked in confusion. Well, if I can make the portal work, I can get help with this task. Backup, you know, like another dark wizard who is able to help me complete the task. Another dark wizard? She asked. Are you a dark wizard? The question caught him off guard. He hadn't even realized that he had phrased it that way. Was he a dark wizard? The idea of being thought of as such made him blink back sudden, surprising tears. I don't think so. I don't feel like one. I don't think you're one either. Myrtle seemed to consider the situation for a moment, then said, Why didn't you just refuse? Refuse what? Refuse to complete the task, of course. She looked at him like he was daft. He threatened to kill my mother, to torture her to death. Then he would search for me, to torture and kill me. I don't want either of those things to happen. I know my mother would say that it would be a small sacrifice for her if I could escape, but it wouldn't. It wouldn't be a small sacrifice to me. And if he tortures me, he will search my memories and find Hermione. I vowed to myself that I would protect her. But you would sacrifice Dumbledore? Draco sighed raggedly. I don't want to, but if it isn't me doing the killing, the wizard who ordered me to do it will just send someone else. The Dark Lord will make it happen, with or without me. So it's a choice between one old life or 3 young ones. I think even Dumbledore would understand that logic. At least, I hope so." "What will happen after you kill him?" the ghostly girl asked. Draco thought for a moment. "Do you mean, will he stay and become a ghost?" "I don't know. I don't think so." "No, Dumbledore would never be a ghost." "I mean, to you. What will happen to you?" Draco sat in silence for a long time, thinking. Why had he never thought about this? He had spent so much time contemplating how he could succeed in completing his task. He never thought about what might happen when he succeeded, or failed. "I don't know." "Hermione Granger is going to hate you," Myrtle said with barely suppressed mirth. She was right, of course. Draco knew that. She would hate him if she knew what the task was. She would loathe him if he succeeded. "One thing is for sure," Myrtle smirked, continuing. "They won't be giving you a trophy for special services to the school like they did Tom Riddle." Draco drew in a sharp breath. "Who did you say?" "I told you. The boy that found the basilisk. Closed the chamber. Tom Riddle. He was a bit dreamy, you know." Draco felt like he might be sick. The girl sitting in front of him was likely one of Voldemort's first victims, and she didn't even know it. His resolve strengthened, and he stood. Hermione would not be one of Voldemort's next victims, not if he could help it. He was getting this cabinet fixed. She might loathe him when it was done, but at least she would be alive. It was back to the library. He needed to do more research now that he knew a bit more about the cabinet. The Reparo was not the only spell required to restore the cabinet, but he didn't know what else needed to be done. The February snows had melted as March had finally arrived, and many students were taking advantage of the slightly warmer weather by flying or playing Quidditch. It was Saturday morning, ordinarily a Hogsmeade weekend, but the outing had been cancelled because of Katie Bell's unfortunate brush with death. The library was emptier than usual just before lunch, though the OWL and NEWT students could always be counted upon to be there as exams approached. Even Urquhart had finally given in and cracked a book open. His robe pocket warmed. "I need you to meet me outside of the hospital wing. Statue of the Mediwitch, the alcove behind it. 10 minutes. His stomach lurched a little. What was going on? Was she hurt? Was someone in the hospital wing? It wasn't her, since she wanted to meet him outside of the infirmary. Could she be pregnant? His stomach swooped suddenly, a tiny flit of excitement surrounded by a gigantic ball of panic in his mind. No, surely the contraception charms had worked. He packed his things quickly and left for the hospital. He was sitting in the alcove when she appeared. She had been crying. Something was clearly wrong. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" "Ron was poisoned," she said in a flat voice. Of all the things she could have said, this was one of the last things he expected. "Oh. Merlin, that's awful. I'm sorry to hear it. I don't care much for the weasel's personality, but did you do this?" "What?" he asked, aghast. "Of course not. Why would I want to poison Ron Weasley?" "He accidentally took the poison. It was in a bottle of mead in Slughorn's office." Draco was speechless. He tried to cover his immediate feelings of guilt with surprise. "Gods, that's terrible. Why did Slughorn have poisoned Mead?" "We don't know. Perhaps he meant to poison Harry, and Ron drank it instead. But Harry says that Slughorn had gotten the bottle as a gift for Dumbledore, so perhaps Slughorn intended to poison Dumbledore. Or maybe he didn't even know about the poison at all, and it was already in the bottle." Draco covered his face, rubbing his eyes. "I can't believe this happened. Is he... How is he? She had not said that Weasley was dead, only poisoned, so perhaps there was hope. He will need to take several antidote doses for the next week, but Madame Pomfrey thinks he will make a good recovery. But you didn't answer my question. Did you do it? Hermione. He reached for her. He could feel her pull away slightly, but then she relaxed a bit, letting him put his arms around her. I never intended for anyone else to get hurt, he whispered softly into her hair. She pulled away, stiffening. So, you had a part in this? I did not want a part. But your life, my mother's life, my life were at stake. Your mother chose this life. She chose to marry your father, Hermione hissed. My mother was betrothed to that man at the age of 14. There was no choice involved, he said disgustedly. If she had a choice now, she would leave, but she will not leave without me, and I will not leave without you. But how am I in danger? I mean, in more danger than usual, being a mudblood who is best friends with Harry Potter, she asked in disbelief. It's my fault. It's because of me, he croaked. Because I love you. My occlumency is decent, but if I'm tortured, I will not be able to maintain control of my thoughts and memories forever. He and Bellatrix will search them. They will find you. They will torture and kill you. All because you had the nerve to be a muggle-born who defiled a pureblood. They will make an example of you, of us. Bellatrix... At this, Draco broke down in gasping, heaving sobs, memories of horrible conversations with his mother, Neville, and Middy swirling in his mind. She's sick. She's tortured and killed animals and house elves for fun. She tortured Longbottom's parents to insanity. Hermione's eyes brimmed with fresh, fearful tears. He took her by the shoulders. I cannot let that happen to you. I will do whatever I can to protect you. And if it means that I have to do something heinous to... But the secrecy bond stopped him from giving her details. Draco, you could have killed Katie and Ron. Tears flowed down her cheeks. You think I don't know it? He gasped hoarsely. You think I haven't had nightmares about choking necklaces and tortured animals and all the rest? I have had to look at Katie's seat, empty in ancient ruins, every other day, knowing that she may never come back, and it's all my fault. His sobs overtook him, and he sank to the floor, hugging her around the knees. Hermione, I'm begging you to forgive me. Turn me in if you must. I won't blame you. I will gladly spend the next decade, 2 decades, the rest of my life in Azkaban. But I won't be able to bear it if you don't forgive me. Can you tell me who it is? Who have you been ordered to kill? She looked deeply into his eyes. Is it Harry? Slughorn? Dumbledore? Who? But he could only stare at her with panic and misery in his eyes, unable to confirm or deny anything. Draco, I'm going to need some time. I will contact you when I'm ready to see you again. She removed her handkerchief from her cuff and wiped her cheeks. He stood, holding her by the elbows gently. I love you, he said. Of that I am sure. I just don't know anything else right now. I need to get back. They're going to let us in to see him soon. I hope Ron makes a full and quick recovery. Thank you, she said simply. She squeezed his shoulders gently in a small hug. He desperately wanted to deepen the hug, to pull her to him and hold her forever, for a minute, for as long as she would let him. But he knew it would not happen. He closed his eyes and more tears fell. When he opened them, she was gone. He reached into his pocket and removed the handkerchief, feeling her tears on the cool, cloth surface. Chapter 63. Evanesco Theory. Elf Tales. Draco awoke with a start, slumped against the wall in the alcove behind the Mediwitch statue. Just as he had last year in the broom cupboard near the entrance hall, he had cried himself to sleep due to his ever-present exhaustion. He looked at his watch. The time was 11:47, but he truthfully had no idea if it meant 11 in the morning or 11 at night. He had come here in the morning. He had either been asleep for about 1 hour or for 13 hours. It was a testament to his bone-deep fatigue that he had no idea which it was. There were voices in the corridor. He stretched and stood, quiet as a cat, trying to make out who it was. He leaned out a bit into the corridor, confirming that it was night-time. Hagrid, Potter, and Hermione were walking away from the hospital wing. Hagrid looked as though he had spent the entire day fighting brambles and beasts in the Forbidden Forest with the crossbow he carried. Potter and Hermione seemed shell-shocked and exhausted, as they had likely just spent around 12 hours sitting vigil at their friend's bedside. They were discussing Weasley's attack, and Draco held his breath to listen in. "I mean, it's always been a bit of a risk, sending a kid to Hogwarts, hadn't it? You expect accidents, don't you, with hundreds of underage wizards all locked up together. But attempted murder, that's different. It's no wonder Dumbledore's angry with Hagrid stopped walking and talking suddenly. "What? Dumbledore's angry with Snape?" Potter demanded. "I never said that," said Hagrid, though Potter's guess was clearly correct based on the look on Hagrid's face. The older wizard tried to make a hasty escape, noting the time, but Potter pressed him for details. "Why is Dumbledore angry with Snape?" Harry asked loudly. Hagrid shushed him. "Don't shout stuff like that, Harry. You want me to lose me job? Mind, I don't suppose you care, would you? Not now that you've given up care of magical— Don't try to make me feel guilty. It won't work." Potter answered angrily. "What's Snape done?" "I don't know, Harry. I shouldn't have heard it at all. I was coming out the forest the other evening, and I overheard 'em arguing. I didn't like to draw attention to myself, so I sorta skulked and tried not to listen, but it was a heated discussion, and it wasn't easy to block out." Here Hagrid paused and shifted his weight back and forth nervously, moving the crossbow he carried from one hand to the other. "Well?" Harry urged him, as did Draco from his alcove, silently. "Well, I just heard Snape saying Dumbledore took too much for granted, and maybe Snape didn't want to do it anymore." "Do what?" Draco wondered. "Do what?" Potter mercifully asked. "I don't know, Harry. Sounded like Snape was feeling a bit overworked, that's all. Anyway, Dumbledore told him flat out he'd agreed to do it, and that was all there was to it. Pretty firm with him. And then he said something about Snape making investigations into his house in Slytherin. Well, there's nothing strange about that. All the heads of house were asked to look into that necklace business." "Yeah, but Dumbledore's not having rows with the rest of them, is he?" Potter pointed out. Hagrid looked nervous at this turn in the conversation. He twisted his crossbow in worry. A loud crack rent the air in the corridor as the weapon snapped. "I know what you're like about Snape, Harry, and I don't want you to go reading more into this than there is." Hermione spoke up. "Look out." Draco stopped breathing, for a brief second worried that she was pointing him out to the other two wizards from where he leaned out from behind the tapestry. But it turned out that Argus Filch was huffing and wheezing further up the corridor. "Oh ho!" the ancient squib wheezed. "Out of bed so late? This'll mean detention." "No, it won't, Filch," said Hagrid angrily. "They're with me, aren't they?" An argument ensued between Hagrid and Filch, quickly made 10 times worse by the arrival of Peeves the poltergeist. Under cover of the spiraling hubbub of noise, Potter and Hermione escaped down one corridor towards Gryffindor Tower, whilst Draco slipped up the other one to take a different staircase down to the dungeons. So, Professor Dumbledore and Professor Snape were arguing, and Dumbledore was questioning Snape, asking him to make investigations into Slytherin. Were the conversations between Draco and Snape part of the investigations? Or was Snape acting on his own, trying to glean information for the Dark Lord? And what is it that Dumbledore had asked Snape to do, that the younger wizard no longer wished to do? Was it spying on Voldemort? Protecting Potter? Draco laid awake for only a short few minutes after his head hit the pillow. In spite of the fitful rest he'd gotten in the alcove, his body was still exhausted, and he was stiff and aching from sleeping sitting up as well. As he lay there thinking through everything he had heard, he thought Dumbledore still felt confident enough in Snape's allegiance to argue with him. That had to mean something, right? Could his head of house be trusted to help Draco out of his mess? He just could not be sure, and it was a chance he was simply unwilling to take. The stakes were too high, the cost was too much. If he calculated incorrectly and made a wrong move, everyone he loved was in danger. He had to finish what he started, without Snape's help. A week later, Draco had convinced Greg and Vince to stand watch for him so he could work on the Vanishing Cabinet during the Gryffindor versus Hufflepuff match. He felt as though he was nearing a breakthrough with the charms needed for the cabinet. He had woken up thinking about it, and he wanted to try a few things as soon as possible. Hermione had only written a couple of times, with small updates about Weasley's recovery. The tone of her notes was always neutral, never filled with blame, but he still couldn't help but feel ashamed for his part in orchestrating the entire thing. The two Slytherin boys took their dose of polyjuice with the usual amount of grumbling, and accompanied him up the stairs into the entrance hall on their way to the Room of Requirement. The trio passed Potter on his way down the stairs, headed for the match. "Where are you going?" Potter barked at him, and the two boys dressed as girls. "Yeah, I'm really going to tell you, because it's your business, Potter," he retorted in annoyance. "You'd better hurry up. They'll be waiting for the chosen captain, or the boy who scored, or whatever they call you these days." Draco pushed past him and hurried up the stairs, closely followed by the giggling Crabbe and Goyle. Once in the Room of Hidden Things, he stared at the Vanishing Cabinet as though willing it to tell him his secrets. One of the birds, the smallest one, was walking up and down his arm, and he found the rhythmic movement soothing, centering. So, after the fireworks display, the cabinet had been vanished, given up as broken beyond repair. Ordinarily, according to theoretical laws of transfigurations, an object that's vanished turns from being into non-being, meaning the essence of the object is rearranged, transmuted, and recreated in the essence of a million other different objects. And yet, that did not seem to be the case here. Flitwick vanished it, according to Myrtle. If this cabinet had followed the normal rules of magic, it would cease to exist in its current state. And yet here it was, in this room. It seemed unlikely that this was because it had a twin elsewhere. Magical tethers like that did not usually matter when it came to transfigurations, according to McGonagall. The room did not exist solely for vanished objects, that much was clear. Professor Trelawney had tried to come in and hide her sherry bottles, so it stood to reason that other students, other teachers, had entered this room to physically hide things. Yet that wasn't the case with everything. In his time spent in the room, Draco had done his fair share of exploring. There were embarrassing love letters, half-finished essays that had been scrapped and abandoned, notes clearly written between friends during classes, with half-completed hangman games, broken teacups, bowls, and inkwells, scraps of fabric and lace, even whole, hopelessly out-of-fashion robes. Torn posters, broken broomsticks, dried-out murtlap, or potions. In short, many of the items in the room weren't things that someone wanted to hide away, but things that people had simply vanished. Outside of these walls, a vanished object was just that, vanished, gone into non-being. What made Hogwarts different? Draco thought about it. You weren't able to apparate or disapparate inside the grounds, unless the headmaster had released the specific wards regarding apparition. What if there were similar wards in place for vanished objects? Perhaps the founders or an early headmaster realized that when teenagers are allowed to vanish objects easily, chaos could reign. Certainly, students weren't able to go around vanishing each other's homework or clothes. Draco was sure that there were some who had tried. But if it were allowed according to the usual laws of magic, order could dissolve quickly. Perhaps Evanesco did not work the same here as it did everywhere else. If the cabinet had had Evanesco performed on it within the wards of Hogwarts, where some sort of anti-Evanesco ward existed, its magical properties would likely significantly alter the original spells and incantations performed on it. He needed to go back to the library, and checking his watch, he realized that he probably needed to go to lunch before it ended in the Great Hall. Presumably, the Gryffindor and Hufflepuff match was over, and he was curious to find out who had won. Well, it was no more than Potter deserved, Draco mused, as he heard the blow-by-blow retelling of the Gryffindor-Hufflepuff match. Any Quidditch captain who allowed the sort of mutiny that McLaggen had apparently dealt out on the pitch today just wasn't fit to lead, he thought. In an unprecedented move, McLaggen had seemed to try to play 2 Quidditch positions at once, the end result being neither position was played well. He'd sent their seeker to the hospital wing with a cracked skull. Draco privately thought, with as injury-prone as Potter was, and also being the top target of the Dark Lord, perhaps he ought to inquire at St. Mungo's about a dedicated private suite for future visits. Draco had only just dropped off to sleep that night, well, really, very early that morning, when there was a faint pop next to his head that caused him to start and jerk, nearly toppling out of the bed. He yanked his wand from beneath the pillow and muttered "Lumos," wondering what the hell was going on now. At least Umbridge's sodding cat had always arrived silently. "Master Draco Malfoy! Sir, Dobby must talk to you." "What?" Draco tried to clear the fog of his brain. He blinked several times and looked more closely at the elf, whose lip and knuckles were bleeding and who had unmistakable bite marks on one ear. "Dobby must speak to Draco Malfoy about Harry Potter, sir." Draco was more awake now. "What's going on with Potter, Dobby? Is he all right? Injury got worse?" Draco wasn't sure why, but in his confused stupor of half-wakefulness, the idea of that caused a small flare of concern in his gut. "Harry Potter is still recovering, but he is asking Dobby and Creature to follow Draco Malfoy, sir. Harry Potter thinks Draco Malfoy is doing bad things, sir, but Dobby knows Draco Malfoy is on Harry Potter's side, sir. Draco Malfoy is not a bad wizard." Draco was wide awake now. He had so many questions. Potter was having him followed. By Creature. Why was Creature here? Wasn't the elf tied to Black Manor? How was Potter giving him orders? And did Dobby really think he was a good wizard? For some reason, that seemed nearly the most pressing question, yet it was the one he was too embarrassed to ask. "Is Creature at Hogwarts? Why isn't he at Black Manor?" "Creature was ordered by Harry Potter to live at Hogwarts, sir, after Harry Potter inherited Black Manor. Creature is not happy here, sir, but he is helping to make the food and clean the castle with the other elves." So Potter inherited Black Manor from Sirius. As the person who would be named head of the House of Black in only a few short months, Draco had to admit he felt almost a sense of relief. Every time the thought of assuming the mantle of head of House Black had crossed his mind after Sirius's death, he had wondered what he would do with that creepy old house and all its contents. When Draco told Hermione last year that Mundungus Fletcher could keep anything he could cart off, he wasn't joking. "Why does Potter want me followed, Dobby?" "Harry Potter wants to know where you are going in the castle," and who you are going with." So, Potter was suspicious of him. Draco could have guessed that without the elf's confirmation. Well, the only place that Draco went where he wouldn't want Potter to find out was the room of requirement. Luckily, the room would stay closed to anyone who did not know the specific purpose for which it was being used once it was occupied. Hermione had taught him that. She had emphasized that the request for the appearance of the room of requirement must be airtight. When the two of them had used the room last Easter, they had always made sure that the request included something to the effect that the room would stay private, just for the two of them. Draco had tried the same request for the Room of Hidden Things, but it had not worked, as Sybil Trelawney had shown once before. Possibly this was because the room had existed before he'd asked for it to appear. With as many items as were inside, clearly the room had been being conjured for centuries. Still, anyone using the room had to pace outside the hallway 3 times, so if Kreacher reported this to Potter, he would know that Draco was using the room for something. But it could not be helped. Draco could not stop his work on the vanishing cabinet. "Okay, Dobby. Thanks for telling me." Draco stuck out his hand to Dobby and shook the small elf's hand briefly. Dobby hesitated, giving Draco a very small smile, then put his tiny hand in the wizard's larger one. Curiosity got the best of Draco. Remembering how much Winky had hated being in the castle versus her own home, he asked, "Does Kreacher like working in the castle?" "No, sir. Kreacher would like to go back to his last mistress. He pines for her, you see." "Ah, yes. Walburga." Draco grimaced, remembering the creepy old woman. "No, sir. Kreacher says his last mistress is named Bellatrix Black Lestrange." A chill ran through Draco that had nothing to do with the coolness of the dungeons. Sirius would have been Kreacher's master, but as the eldest Black Witch, Bellatrix would technically be his mistress. But with the house being left to Potter, and Potter being unmarried with no mother, there was no mistress. "Why does he want to be her elf, Dobby?" "Kreacher says Miss Bellatrix is kind to Kreacher, and follows the Black family code. When Harry Potter inherited Black Manor, Kreacher was bonded to the house, and his bond went to Harry Potter. But he says that when Master Draco comes of age, he will petition with the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures to have his bond reverted to Master Draco," Dobby said a bit sadly. Draco was numb with shock. Elves can do that. "Yes, Master Draco. Winky tried to do this to be given to Mr. Crouch Jr., but the department sent her away because he was dead." Well, supposedly dead, Draco thought. If Kreacher was returned to a House of Black family member, he could be ordered by Bellatrix to carry out very bad tasks, much worse than following Draco around Bloody Castle. Draco knew that it was only his and his mother's presences that protected Pym and the other house elves at Malfoy Manor. He shuddered to think of what would happen to them if he and Narcissa were to be overpowered, or worse, die. Their bonds would then revert to Lucius or Bellatrix as the oldest members of their heads of houses. Blood on a blue towel came unbidden to his mind. He blinked it away. Dobby. Kreacher has to follow the orders given to him by Potter. That's his master, so there's no getting around that. You cannot tell Kreacher or Potter that I'm on Potter's side, or it'll cause issues for Hermione. She won't want him to know that we're friends." Draco looked away from Dobby at this realization. Just as many in Slytherin House would ostracize him if they knew he was dating Hermione, many of the Gryffindors, and especially Potter and Weasley, would shun Hermione. He shook his head as though to clear the thoughts and continued, "But you need to tell Kreacher that he is not to try to come back to the Black family magic again. It is not safe for him there." Dobby nodded vigorously, his ears flapping. Draco knew the elf remembered the abuse that he had suffered over the years at the hands of Lucius. Tell him I'm a bad wizard, and that he should not want to be my elf. Draco exhaled tiredly. If he comes to live in Malfoy Manor right now, he will regret it. Yes, Dobby will tell Kreacher that. It will keep Kreacher safe, Master Draco. Dobby smiled kindly at him. Just Draco, Dobby. You're a free elf, remember? Yes, Draco. Thank you for listening to this chapter of The Handkerchief by Great78.